Welcome to Plant Your Seed. I'm your host, Fred Ferris. On each episode, we share stories of how ordinary people have transformed their lives. Each story is compassionate, each story is authentic, and each story is a transformation. Here are the stories of the people who are changing our world by transitioning to a plant-based diet. Today on Plant Your Seed, joining us from Connecticut, we have Holly Skodis. Holly is the founder of Yoga is Vegan, a project and podcast dedicated to helping yogis embrace veganism. Welcome, Holly.
Thank you, Fred. I am so excited to be on this podcast. Thank you for having me on. It's always wonderful to be around people who get kind of thrilled about the health and wellness when it comes to what we eat and the ethics behind it. So thank you. I appreciate being on today.
Thanks for being here on Plant Your Seed. Now, what is it about yoga that makes it vegan?
You know, it's interesting because if you look back at the older texts,
Mm-hmm.
Yoga sutras are something that a lot of yoga teachers will learn about. There's a lot of references in yoga to something called Ahimsa, which is non-violence.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea that non-violence, right? Yogis are ultimately, hopefully, living in a way where they're trying to live more of an enlightened life, more of a compassionate life, more of an understanding that we're all kind of from the same divine essence. And when you're on the path of yoga, there's certain rules and ethics about it. And being nonviolent towards all beings, all sentient beings, in the way that we think, what we do, what we eat, how we behave, all of our actions, the way that we interact with the world and those who dwell in it are very important. So if we're supposed to strive to live in accordance to this nonviolence, ahimsa, then when you start to understand veganism, which is an ethical way of being that tries to live in this world and cause the least amount of harm to all beings, I see yoga and veganism to a certain degree synonymous.
How can someone interpret ahimsa, which is nonviolence, to mean something other than being vegan? Is that possible?
It is. And I mean, you know, it's hard to look, you know, when you look at things like this, whether it's religion or yoga, when you have these ancient texts, there are a lot of rituals and ways of being that were much different than the world that we live in now.
Mm-hmm.
The cow is a sacred being in India, and there are a lot of practices where consuming ghee, which is a clarified butter, or consuming dairy, or having these pujas where they offer dairy to the gods.
Mm-hmm.
All of this was done at a time where our relationship, or a yogi's relationship to a cow, was much different. You know, this was almost like having a companion animal,
Mm-hmm.
a dog or a cat. And so I think the relationship with a cow was very different and sacred at the time. And also, the way that we could heal ourselves with food was different based on availability. So now we are in a practice of yoga where it's gone from the east to the west for a variety of reasons. And yoga is no longer this spiritual practice for many. It's been turned into a physical practice. That's how I got into it. I love the physical practice, don't get me wrong. But through all of this, it's kind of lost a lot of its spiritual essence. And in exchange of that, it's become a commodity where yoga teachers like myself go to schools and we learn about yoga, and we still have to learn some of these rules from the spiritual texts, but they're interpreted differently. Like, for example, when I did my first teacher training in
Mm-hmm.
Los Angeles, when we were talking about Ahimsa, it's LA, you've got road rage, and part of it was, well, don't flip somebody off. Okay. you know, all right, I see where you're going with this. Something common I hear from a lot of students is a misunderstanding that Ahimsa is something about how you treat yourself,
Hmm.
right? So the yamas and the niyamas, the yamas are these first five rules, and Ahimsa is the first one, but it's ultimately looking at how we treat the world. I like to think of it as going from the heart center out into the
Mm-hmm.
world. So because there have been so many different teacher trainings, because we're no longer learning yoga as it once was, there's a lot of interpretations, and it's not like anything else in the world where you can understand something to be wrong, but due to the world, the way that you live in the world, and the normalcy of eating meat, or the necessity of having it, or milk, kind of overrides, I think, our ability sometimes to be able to look at these concepts in an honest manner. That makes sense.
Yeah. Do you feel it's possible to be yogic while eating meat?
Wow. Um, I don't. I've had a lot of great yoga teachers that teach a great physical practice who are meat eaters, but I don't consider them spiritual people.
Hmm.
And actually, I should backtrack a little. If you were somewhere where there, like, say you were in Alaska and there were no supermarkets, and you had to have fish or something to survive, could you be a spiritual person? Yeah, I think you could.
Hmm.
But I think if you are living in an area of selection and abundance, then I don't think I just don't see the connection to true yoga if you're not honoring that.
It seems that there's a very interesting connection between veganism and yoga. And that's where sometimes people will get into it for different reasons and it'll have an effect on them. Sometimes people get into being vegan for their health or for the animals or for the planet. And in the same way, it seems that people would get into yoga through the physical and then develop into the spiritual. Is that the way you see it as well? That you can go from kind of getting your feet wet to then becoming a more spiritual person?
100%. And that's why I don't want to say you can't practice yoga unless you're vegan. Because I wasn't vegan when I started practicing yoga. If I had come to a yoga class and they told me I had to be vegan, I would have probably walked out. I was more interested in learning how to handstand, to be honest with you.
That
Um,
handstanding is cool.
it really is. But you know, that's that was the lure for me. And there's so many layers, I think, that we need to break down in both terms of our yogic practice and in terms of our vegan practice, where it becomes a refinement. That's another way where veganism and yoga are the same. I got into plant-based living because I needed to be healthier. And as time goes by, I was able to refine it and refine it further. And the same thing with the yoga practice.
What are some of the benefits of doing yoga?
Oh gosh, where do I start? There's so many. Uh, I was somebody who was very, very, very anxious as a kid, and I found that it yoga allowed me to learn how to breathe. Learned I learned how to calm down my central nervous system. I was able to, I got flexibility, obviously, strength. Those are some of the benefits that you first kind of see when you start doing yoga. And I think as time went on, it shifted just who I was and kind of how I dealt with other people in the world.
What is it about yoga that makes you slow down? You said you were anxious as a kid. You were able to change your breathing. You were able to slow down, relax, get a better understanding of the world.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that through the veganism as well, but in terms of the physical practice, I don't know if you've practiced yoga, but there is the linking of the breath and the movement. You start moving in a deliberate way, and you start slowing down or holding or being in a pose for a certain amount of time, and it allows you to build a relationship with being uncomfortable in the body. You develop a better capacity for your lungs as well. And what happens when you can consistently do this practice, it starts to kind of slow down the brain bouncing around all the time. And I did this with meditation as well. But I think really for me initially it was just the slowing down and the matching of the breath, the in breath with the out breath, and the movement, and becoming really deliberate about it instead of hurried, you know, learning when you're breathing shallow and slowing it all down.
How is meditation different, or do you get into a meditative state while you're in these poses?
Mm, sometimes I think it really depends on the practice. I will tell you that if I go to a yoga class, that's not going to happen for me. I found in practicing styles of yoga that utilize the same series of poses, right? Almost even a choreography of your whole class.
Hmm.
I will practice Ashtanga yoga, the primary series, and Dharma yoga. I'm certified in Dharma yoga as well. And when you have the familiarity of the same poses every time, and this is just a specific yoga practice that I do, doesn't I will find that your body remembers these postures. So you're able to move in and out without thinking, like, what's next? I already know what's next.
Hmm.
And so there will be times, there have been some really interesting times where I've practiced and I will be able to kind of soften my gaze and see almost a mirror of myself practicing it and just sort of follow it.
Hmm.
And I think that's probably the most spiritual I've felt in a physical yoga class. A lot of times I'm not doing that at all, to be clear. A lot of times I'm just a little stuck a little too much in the body. So I see the yoga practice for me, the physical posture is almost even separate from my spiritual practice a lot of the time.
Now, is there a best style for beginners?
I think the best style of yoga is the one that you enjoy because everybody's different. You could have an athlete that's a beginner at yoga or a kid who is a gymnast is, you know, or a dancer who goes to a yoga class and they've already got a muscular foundation or flexibility that makes a harder class easier, where you might get a little bored in a slower class or a foundations class. So I think it just really, you have to just kind of have to find a good teacher. Whatever the style is, find somebody you connect with, find somebody that challenges you, whether it's mentally or physically. But if you don't love it, you're not gonna stick with it. So you have to just like it.
Let's switch gears over to your plant based story. How and when did you transition to a plant based diet?
What coincided with my yoga teacher training, basically. How old was I? I was probably around 30, 39 when I was having a lot of health problems, not serious health problems, but my blood pressure was going up. I'd become, had a lot of anxiety. That happened in my early 30, late 30s, I guess it was all hitting. So terrible anxiety, terrible insomnia got really, really bad. And I think a lot of this just kind of kicked up in my system after having both of my daughters and lack of sleep and all that kind of stuff. And so my numbers, I had gone to the doctor and my numbers for my blood pressure and cholesterol and inflammation in the body. They were all in the yellow zone.
Mm.
And it scared me because my aunt had a heart attack when she was, I want to say 45, 42, young.
Mm-hmm.
Her father, she was my dad's sister, or she still is, so her father had a heart attack when he was in his mid 50s and collapsed and actually died while she was trying to carry him down the stairs.
Mm.
And so we had a real threat of heart disease. My father was a lifelong alcoholic and drank so much that in his late 50s, he had cirrhosis of the liver and had liver failure, was in a coma for a few weeks, ended up getting a liver transplant, which I have feelings about,
Mm.
um, and kind of got this sort of second chance on life. But he hadn't, I think he suffered a lot of brain damage as well from the incident, but he still continued to smoke and he didn't think he had a drinking problem. And
Mm.
so these habits, he also didn't eat very well and he didn't exercise or move around. And, I really loved my dad, but I watched this example of how you treat your body will potentially destroy you. And
Mm.
in the process, hurt a lot of people around you. And so he ended up, long story short, he had his liver transplant. It was about 4 years from going from coma to transplant to lung cancer to him passing away. And my mother-in-law, my husband's mom, had pancreatic cancer shortly before this plant-based journey of mine started, and very similar in terms of not eating the right things, not exercising, smoking a lot. It just, watching people you care about just have these really horrific cancers
Mm.
scared me. And here I was, a new mom, and very worried that, not that I would repeat that. Also, there was a lot of emotional abuse in my household growing up, but I was very scared that I could fall into some of the patterns of my parents. And I didn't want that to happen. And so I also didn't want to go on medication. I started researching around. This was 2011, maybe 2010. Read the China study. I don't know how I came across that book, but I read it. I also I watched Forks Over Knives and started to get educated on those early documentaries and books about reversing your diseases, chronic
Mm-hmm.
diseases through diet. And I thought, okay, that's for me. I know I need to do this because I didn't want to be on medication. And so at the same time, this was, I guess, 2010, I was thinking about doing my very first yoga teacher training. I had read the autobiography of a yogi, which we talked about a little earlier,
Mm-hmm.
and knew that traditional yoga practitioners were vegetarian. And I thought, all right, whole food, plant-based, this is similar. It just seemed so foreign to me. I was too scared to go without the dairy because I just didn't understand what to cook at the
Mm-hmm.
time.
Yeah.
Seems so ridiculous now, but that was my headspace at the time. And I thought, well, I'll commit to being a vegetarian for the duration of this teacher training, which I believe was around 3 months. And so it started there. I knew better. I knew I needed to be whole food, plant-based for it to work. But going vegetarian was at least not too scary. And so that's where I started. I was really fortunate. There were 2 vegans at my teacher training, students, who told me, actually there were 3 now that I think about it, who just started to kind of educate me about, why cheese has animal, like what's the harm with cheese?
Mm-hmm.
And started to just kind of tell me these things. They weren't obnoxious about it, but they were showing me like, oh, you could do this, or, you could eat rice or beans, and kind of made it a little safer. So I started, doing a little more plant-based. And I think it was probably by the end of that teacher training, I'd gone complete plant-based at that point.
Did you notice any positive changes after you
Oh
changed
God.
to plant-based?
Yeah, where do I start, right? Yeah, I mean, a whole food plant-based diet will completely revolutionize your life, right? It will change everything.
Mm.
I think it probably helped balance my hormones. The blood pressure came down. I was at a point where I had to check it daily, and that was fine. My blood work was great, and I was able to sleep more. I was able the anxiety, that was the biggest thing I noticed, because I had such tremendous anxiety growing up in the household that I did, that it just my brain was so turned on to this crazy spinning all the time. And I found myself happier and feeling better. My husband and I tell this a lot. We were both kids that struggled with our weight. And there were times I've been with my husband since I was 20, but there were a couple times where we would do diets because we gained, 15, 20 pounds or whatever. And I always kind of had to be mindful of what I ate. And what I found was, as soon as I was eating a whole food plant-based diet, my body became its perfect weight. So
Mm.
there wasn't this bouncing all over the place. It just leveled to a place that felt great. So those were the biggest takeaways.
Do you feel that the positive changes were a combination of the yoga or yoga teaching and a whole food plant-based diet, as opposed to just the whole food plant-based diet?
I think the meditation and the yoga part of it was extremely helpful for me. I think in my case, because I had such severe anxiety, it was the combination of the two.
Mm.
And, I've found that through my yoga practices, especially some of the later teacher trainings that I did with Sri Dharma Mitra, I really started to understand the food as part of my spiritual practice. And so I think it's the combination that allows me to find a greater place of peace.
Take us back to the time when you changed to a whole food plant-based diet. You are at this teacher training and you decide you're going to do this. Start with vegetarianism. And you come home and you tell your husband, and what does he say?
He's so easy. I did not have the struggles that other people have. I'd been watching, I think he'd already watched Forks Over Knives with me. He already knew I was kind of getting into it.
Mm-hmm.
And he knew I was really scared about being medicated and I was trying to heal myself. So what I did initially was I remember I think it was only the first night or something, but I was making my food and I made something separate for my family. And he looked at me and he goes, why are you making separate food for yourself? I'll just eat what you're eating. It looks good. It was so
Mm.
easy. So he didn't jump on the vegan train as quickly as I did. He is now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but he was able to just kind of watch my progress. He was concerned in the same way because he had watched his mom die as well. So he was concerned about his health. We both were very interested in just being great parents to our kids. So he was fine. He just kind of followed my lead, and if he wanted pizza or whatever when we went out, or I don't know, Super Bowl or something, he would just get it. He was a flexitarian at first,
Mm-hmm.
but never gave me a hard time, not once.
Now, did you struggle with family or friends when you first became plant-based? Because you mentioned that it sounds like your family was a traditional American diet.
Yeah, I mean, something I don't know if I really even talk about it very often, but by the time I'd had my kids, I grew up in a very abusive household
Hmm.
mentally. I had already cut ties with my
Mm.
mom. So my thought was that, as a mother, it was my duty to make sure that my children were brought up in an environment without that kind of chaos. And so there were some stipulations that I put forward and just kind of said, hey, if you can't do X, Y, or Z, then it's not going to work out. She's still alive, so I don't want to get too far into that for her sense of privacy, but I kind of already had gotten rid of the family. Like that, that part wasn't very hard.
Mm.
My sister was in San Diego. Um, and in terms of friends, I don't think anybody really cared that much. Like the hardest about the family that was really difficult because my husband's dad lived in Seattle. We didn't see him very much. We didn't have the traditional family in terms of all the holiday dinners. All that stuff had kind of already gone away by the time we had kids. My husband and I had already been together 7 or 8 years even before doing that. So we didn't have to deal with it, to be honest with you. And in terms of friends, I was living in Los Angeles. Like, it wasn't a big deal.
Mm.
It just wasn't. It was pretty easy. I didn't find the struggle till I moved to Connecticut. And then I think I felt some of those struggles that other people feel as far as, not being included or people thinking veganism is weird. It just what, when you're in a bigger city it was just a little bit more evolved and healthy eating is very common there. So it wasn't weird for my friends.
What is one thing that's really exciting you with your project, Yoga is Vegan, or your life right now?
Well, I think what's really exciting about yoga is vegan is that it is back. I put it a little bit on pause for a little while. So it's exciting to be back there. I will be part of the teacher training that's coming, or not, I'm sorry, a retreat, excuse me, that's coming up in May, and we're doing the workings of that. So that's exciting as well. And personally, what is exciting right now? It's just nice to be back to my physical practice. I had some surgeries. I had to wait to get back to the physical practice, so I'm able to do that now. And I don't know, my older girl's gone off to college, and no, things are okay. Like, but in terms of yoga's vegan, I'm just really glad to be back to the project and pushing it forward.
What is it about yoga that makes you so passionate?
That it worked. It didn't work for me. I wouldn't have stuck with it. And it's through yoga that I have met it's through the combination of yoga and veganism that I've met some of the best people I've ever met in the world. And I think having that yoga spiritual connection has just been something really wonderful for me because I'm not somebody who's religious, as we talked about a little bit off the air. I think it's kind of a sense of community that I think I just needed. It just feels natural.
Where did you get the courage to start your project?
That was easy. Um, it's kind of a fun story. So I was doing, gosh, I think I did a 500-hour Dharma Mitra yoga teacher training in New York.
Hmm.
And he's actually, that would be a great place to start because he has a very traditional yoga postures, but always the spiritual built in. He's an amazing teacher. And part of our homework during our teacher training, it went on for months. So it really became ingrained into you. And part of it was you had to either meditate on or journal about Ahimsa
Mm.
every single day for 30 days. And it really, you know, started to make me understand the vegan element. And
Mm.
it was tied in with a sattvic yoga diet as well. It was very specific foods that we had to eat. So when you're eating a sattvic diet, which is more of a whole food, steamed type of either fresh or steamed, nothing frozen, and very even foods. So you're not eating, caffeine, you're not having whatever alcohol or spices or onions or garlic or anything that is supposed to agitate the mind when you're meditating, because we're doing a lot of meditative practices as well. It allowed me to go deeper in my yoga practice. And so part of the homework was also something called karma yoga. We had to do something for our community.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very broad. You could do anything. You could be free classes or, what is this karma? What is this good work that you're going to do that you're not going to attach, the end product? You're not going to attach the fruits of your labor there. You're just going to do this good work. You're going to do it for set period of time. I think it was 3 months. It was a big requirement. And so I had this karma yoga project, didn't know what I was going to do. And I had also done Victoria Moran's Main Street Vegan Academy program.
Mm-hmm.
One opened the door. I was like, oh, I've got to do this as well. And so it was through her program, just kind of learning how to cultivate your own skills and then to utilize them in whatever your craft or skill is, so that you could, into veganism. So I was thinking about that, and I was meditating. Actually, I was on my bed. I was in my room. I had been working on something, and I knew I wanted to do something with yoga and veganism. I didn't know what it was called. I didn't know what it was going to be. And I was sitting there meditating, and I had my laptop on my bed. I was taking a break, and all of a sudden, just something in my head said, yogaisvegan.com. I went, okay, all right. You don't usually get stuff like that, but I did. And I thought, all right, I'm going to go look that up.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why it came to me, but I was like, oh, it's actually available.
Mm.
And so I thought, okay, I'm going to take it, and then I'm going to figure out what that means. It feels right. And so it was having this project that I had to do for a certain amount of time, and finding this yoga is vegan domain name and going, all right, well, I'll start and figure out how yoga is vegan by just talking to it was a blog at first. So featuring as many vegan yogis as I can, just talking about their spiritual and plant-based journey and how they're connected. And that's what started it.
What cookbook, book, or documentary have you gifted or recommended most to someone transitioning to a plant-based diet?
I mean, for me, it's not one book, although I'm going to give you one story because this is my favorite of all of them. But I love my cookbooks. I have tons of cookbooks, and I read a lot of the vegan books and the documentaries as well. I mean, I think my favorite story is my older daughter's friend's father was having some serious heart issues, and we were on vacation talking to him about plant food and how you could reverse your disease. And he's an Italian guy, big meat eater. You wouldn't expect it in a million years, but Kirk and I were talking to him, and he was open because he was scared.
Mm-hmm.
And we just kind of shared with him what we knew. And when I got back, I sent him the How Not to Die book. Actually, I asked him first, I said, are you going to listen to it on an audiobook, or are you going to read it? Because it is big.
Mm-hmm.
He goes, no, I want to read it. I said, really? Because it's really, really big book. It's thick. I'm not sending you a small book. And he goes, no, I'll read it. So I sent it to him. And he read it. And he went plant-based. And he got off his medication. And anytime I see him, he just gives us a hug, because he's like, you guys saved my life.
Mm.
So I think it just depends on on who the person is. You read the books and you know, okay, well, I think this guy will relate to this, or this person would enjoy this story or sensibility. But that's my favorite because I know my best friends, or my daughter's, one of her best friends is probably not going to have to watch her dad die early.
How does that make you feel?
Really good. You know, it's like you can't tell somebody. I think that's one of the biggest problems that we have in the vegan community is you can't berate or lecture somebody into going vegan or plant-based. It doesn't work. The opposite actually happens. It's like unless somebody's receptive to making change, it doesn't matter what you suggest to someone. And so after watching my father just kind of go through what he did, I thought, well, for years I was telling him, if you don't stop drinking, you're going to die early. Like I pleaded with him, and I realized there was no point. There's no point to going on and on. But if somebody's receptive, then you have to go through you just have to give them as much as they can possibly take. Like throw it out there, but don't berate people. And if you see someone getting inspired, give them the added love and attention they deserve.
Finally, can you give me one word to describe how you felt before you became vegan and one word to describe how you feel now that you are vegan?
I think anxious is probably the best word to describe me before I went vegan. And I think now, in terms of veganism, it was maybe compassionate. I think that is what has changed.
Such a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for taking the time. What is the best way for people to follow you and support you on Instagram, the web, and social media in general?
Follow the project at Yoga is Vegan, yogaisvegan.com, and the podcast Yoga is Vegan. Those are the best places. If you want to see my occasional post on Instagram, you can search up my name at Holly Skodis, and you'll see that there. But the good work that I do is all on Yoga is Vegan.
Thanks again, Holly, for being on Plant Your Seed.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate having this wonderful conversation with you.
Hope you are inspired by this story, and remember, it's never too late to plant your seed. Links to everything we talked about on the podcast can be found on Instagram at plant.yourseed in the show notes tab in the bio. If you enjoyed the show, remember to leave us a review, and until next time, thank you for listening.